Hi, and welcome to the Cleaning Challenge. Today we're going to talk about the dairy myth, or more accurately, the dairy dilemma. I'm going to take you through a journey. We're going to talk about all the little myths that are associated with dairy, and also talk about the alternatives to dairy. So let's start off introducing myself. I'm Dr. Patrick Garrett, for those of you who don't know me. I have a functional medicine, clinical nutrition, lifestyle medicine type of practice in a town called Newton, Kansas. And even though I'm in this small town, we actually see patients all around the world, from the Middle East to Asia to all over the U.S. And it's because we have a focus on reversing disease naturally. And so that's one of the best things about the Cleaning Challenge, is that's what people are doing. They're reversing disease, they're decreasing their medication, and really improving quality of life just by changing what they're eating and drinking, which is the basis of what we do even in our practice. I have been a national speaker for quite a few years, and I've spoken on a variety of conditions to physicians, and even taught a 300-hour postdoctoral program out in Colorado to help teach doctors how to do this kind of work. I love post-grad education. There's so much information to know, and I'm really excited because a lot of my stuff comes from Harvard Medical School's Postgrad Association, and they have a wonderful lifestyle medicine program that's second to none. And so I've gotten quite a few courses through there. I had probably about 30 by the end of this year. And so it's a great course because it talks about, here's a patient with a medical problem, and here's what they're eating, here's what they're doing, now what's causing it? How can we reverse these conditions naturally? I also did several courses through Yale Medical School. They have a very small lifestyle medicine program. I also did an open biomedical engineering course through there several years ago, which was pretty interesting. I have diplomates in functional medicine, clinical nutrition, integrated medicine, and I even serve as a senior fellow for the academy, where other physicians, if they run into difficult cases, we can help mentor them through the process. I've served on several leadership boards. I'm president, vice president, past president of the American Board of Functional Medicine, the American Academy of Functional Medicine. I serve as a member for the Harvard Medical School's Postgraduate Association since 2006. And I actually serve on GreenMed Info's board, which is really exciting. It's a wonderful website if you've ever been to it, greenmedinfo.com. The largest database of peer-reviewed nutritional information. So lots of good stuff coming out of there. And I serve as medical director for Blood ID out of Arizona. And then, of course, I'm the national doctor for the Cleaning Challenge. So let's talk about the dairy myth. So much of what I do is, kind of food is medicine. That's the basis, right? How do we eat ourselves into disease? How do we eat ourselves out of disease? And along those foods, we actually have a category of foods that I like to call foods that heal and foods that kill. And dairy is one that most people think is one that heals, but it actually is one that's going to cause a lot of problems for a lot of people. So it ends up being a pretty big topic for myths. One of the concerns is, why do humans even consume the breast milk or the droppings from a cow, right? I mean, we're the only mammalian species that actually does that, especially after 2 years of age. So all mammals drink milk from their own species, but still only up to about 2 years, and then we actually lose the ability to really process that dairy. And we'll talk about what problems that causes. And then, of course, the main dietary myths have to do with protein and calcium and vitamin D, and even that raw milk is healthier. So we'll go on from there, and we'll talk about the hormonal nightmares of dairy and how it affects men, women, and children. And it's pretty shocking as we get into it. So one of the coolest, research journals that I came across that had to do with dairy was the 2009 edition of the journal Endocrinology. So endocrinology is the study of your endocrine system and how your hormones work, and even your neurotransmitters. They started off this research by saying dairy is directly tied to heart disease, cancer, obesity, and diabetes, and we've never known the exact mechanism until now. And that's what we want to talk about today, is It has to do with a lot of the hormonal components to it, and that makes a big difference when you talk about breast milk versus cow milk. So you look at someone like Harvard. Harvard was it's the richest school in the world now, right? They have a huge endowment. And in fact, Harvard is the first school that has broke stride because they no longer need dairy council money. And they have went on and said that dairy is no longer considered part of a healthy diet. And in fact, Harvard has several programs on this talking about why in the research. And as bad as like BPA is, bisphenol A, and that's the plastics that cause anal genital malformations in children, Harvard still says they are more scared or more terrified of plastic because, of dairy, because dairy is 500,000 times more bioavailable when it comes to the hormonal nightmares that it provides. And so it's going to cause tremendous harm compared to even plastic, which is terrible. So this is why, in my practice, I always tell patients, dairy is the devil, right? So it gets their attention, because they're like, whoa, wait a minute, this isn't what I've been told my whole life, right? We see the mustache commercials. Dairy's obviously a wonderful thing, so how can it be evil? Well, let's start off looking at kind of what Americans do, right? I mean, Americans, what do we eat? And I want you to look at this. This is a year's worth of food. And dairy accounts for 1,000 pounds of food a year consumed by most Americans. 1,000 pounds of food. So in this, we talk about this in lifestyle medicine, but the rest of the stuff is not real good. I mean, when it talks about fruits, it's fruit juices. When it talks about vegetables, it's things like ketchup and chips and French fries. So the bulk of what most Americans are eating is pretty crappy stuff. I mean, of those things, the thing that reverses the most disease is fish, and that is the smallest thing consumed by Americans. And so we fill ourselves up with all this stuff that doesn't heal the body, but harms the body. And if you look at something like dairy, dairy consumption has gone up by 50% since 1950. So you're drinking twice as many glasses of milk or consuming twice as much dairy than even your grandparents did. And of that 1,000 pounds, that's half of the weight by volume of what Americans eat. Half of your entire diet by pounds is dairy. That's incredible. Not to mention, we consume about 156 pounds of sugar every year. So that's nothing compared to our dairy. So why do we consume it, right? I love, one's natural consumption, one's abnormal consumption, and hopefully we identify, a baby of that same mammal species drinking that is normal. A different mammal drinking it seems a bit abnormal. So drinking it from a carton is one thing, but when you think about the idea of you're drinking the breast milk of an animal, it's a little weird. Everybody likes cow milk, but nobody likes rat milk, right? Or dog milk, or chicken milk, right? Nah, chickens don't make milk. So the reasons that we consume it is because we're sold this idea really after 1945. When women went to work and the men went to war, there was a move for convenience food. And so Dr. Kellogg, Dr. Graham back then came out with their not steel cut, but their rolled oats and rolled corn. And we got wheat flakes and old-fashioned oatmeal, and suddenly we had instant foods, and then milk became a big thing. And by the 50s and 60s, we had a bunch of sugar added to it. We had cartoon characters, and it made big money for these companies. And so now we're sold this idea of like, well, why did we want to drink milk? Well, they start pushing on the idea that we're going to increase vitamins and minerals and even protein through that. So those are the big ones that try to motivate dairy consumption. So is that accurate, right? Think about this. As an American, right? I don't know, as a human, there we go. As a human, we feel like we have to consume dairy to get enough vitamin D, calcium, and protein, right? If we don't consume enough dairy, we're going to fall apart. But the question I always propose to my patients is, Does the adult cow drink dairy to be a strong cow? Does a gorilla drink dairy? Does a horse drink cow milk to maintain its strength and its endurance? And of course that's not true, right? So what does a cow that weighs 1,500 pounds consume to have bones stronger than us, to have more muscles than us? Well, and of course, that's grass. You have a healthy cow, right? Not corn, but grass. And nobody would be out there telling, say, bodybuilders at a gym, dude, just eat grass and you're going to be super strong like a cow or a horse or a gorilla or an elephant, right? But what that's saying is that there is enough protein and enough calcium in something as grass. Like, who cares about grass, right? You don't think of that as a nutritious balance for you, but it's enough to sustain the largest animals on Earth. And what are we? We're 1/10 of the size of those animals. So of course it would sustain us. So why do we consume dairy then? And the reality is, if it all comes from fruits and vegetables and greens and nuts and seeds, then why are we still drinking dairy, especially after 2 years of age? And it just goes back to that same thing. Dairy is sold to us with the idea that it's going to equal better health. And so we feed our children it, we feed ourselves it. It consumes half our diet, right? But it all came from plants. Everything in that dairy came from plants. That's the amazing part of that, right? And so the first myth is that milk builds strong bones, right? We're sold this idea that the American Osteoporosis Society says, hey, the only solution to strong bones is drinking a bunch of milk all day long. That's how you get strong bones. Or at least in America, right? Because not everybody in the world drinks dairy, but they also have strong bones. And in fact, the cow that we drink it from has bones stronger than us, but it doesn't drink its own milk, right? So if that's true, then the more we consume milk, the less osteoporosis we would have. That sounds right? So we consume 50% more dairy than we did in 1950, and has osteoporosis gone down? And of course it hasn't. And in fact, they project that it's going to get worse and worse and worse. So the more milk we consume, the more osteoporosis that we end up having. And the reason for this is because that dairy is slightly acidic, which means when it enters your blood has to regulate that pH so it pulls out things like calcium. The calcium regulates the pH in the blood, and then you pee out all those extra things. And you end up with bone loss. Over time, osteoporosis. And so dairy does not prevent osteoporosis. Dairy actually causes osteoporosis. And in fact, it wasn't until recently that I found that, if you see any commercial, everything says that the only solution to strong bones is just drinking more dairy. But on the osteoporosis website, it has the FAQ section, and it said, I drink plenty of dairy, so I don't have to worry about osteoporosis. And surprisingly enough, for the first time, it said, actually you do. And I love it, because osteoporosis or strong bones does not come from dairy. That's why every mammal species on the entire planet has strong bones after it's weaned, and it's because it does things that increase the strength of the bone through stronger muscles. Stronger muscles make stronger bones. It's called Wolff's Law. If you put a strain on the body will respond by making stronger tissue. So stronger muscles pull on the bones, which makes stronger bones. And again, it's not calcium supplements either, right? It's actually eating real food and creating a purpose for your bones to be stronger. So doing stuff. So let's look at this at a gram level here, right? How much calcium per gram do we get? So for 100 grams of milk, you get about equal amounts of calcium. But they actually has very little bioavailability because it ends up depleting your bone. And of course, during the pasteurization, they actually destroy the enzymes that help you break down that calcium and then absorb it too. But compare that same equal amount to real food, right? Parsley, you're going to get twice as much, right? So 118 versus 203. Kale, which is awesome, gets you almost twice as much. Broccoli, about the same. Almonds, twice as much. Sesame seeds, about the same. Canned salmon with the bones or sardines, 250 milligrams, twice as much. And that's one little meal, right? One little part of one little meal, one side, one handful gets you at least the same or twice as much as you would from calcium. And that's why, if you look at kale as 187, that's why a cow can eat plants and get, bones that are 3 times bigger than ours. So if you look over here to the right side, you'll see a cow femur or leg bone, and then you see a human femur or leg bone. And that femur is the biggest bone in our entire body, and yet it looks nothing compared to the cow bone that doesn't drink milk, that only eats plants. So that's a total myth, right? Total myth. Myth 2 is, if you want to have strong muscles, you got to drink a lot of milk because milk's full of protein. They actually had a study that came out, I can't remember the university, but they were trying to say that milk helps you lose weight. And they didn't even test milk, they tested protein. And they found that people who consumed protein ate lower glycemic, which then lost weight. And they said, hey, dairy has protein, so dairy must help you lose weight. And of course, that's not true at all, So dairy does not make you stronger, right? The biggest, strongest animals in the world, are they drinking dairy? A gorilla that can, lift 600 pounds with its bicep, is it drinking dairy? Of course not. It's a plant eater. So this is another myth. And so one thing I want to show you is this. This is the body that vegetables build. So this is what a vegan looks like, right? And how can they achieve all that muscle mass just by not eating dairy and meat? And it's because the meat that we eat and the dairy that we drink came from animals that are vegans. There is more than enough protein in every single thing you consume to always sustain as much muscle development as you want, right? It's not a whey protein. If that horse plows a field for 8 hours and you are like, man, that's a good job, Mr. Ed, right? Here's a bag full of whey protein shake. No, oats, right? Hay, grass. That's how the strongest animals on earth rebuild muscles that are greater and stronger than ours. So it goes to the same thing. Dairy does not build strong muscles, or else the animals would also consume those. So my favorite cartoon is the one over here. The little squirrel is saying, no meat at all. Are you sure you're getting enough protein, right? That's what it ends up being. And I love the idea of like the no meat athlete, that you can eat meat. Again, you don't have to be vegetarian, you don't have to be vegan, but that doesn't mean dairy builds protein, right? So let's look at the equal amounts for grams of milk versus grams of protein. So 100 grams of milk, again, gives us 3.4 grams of protein. Now compare that, 3.4 grams of protein. If you ate a piece of kale, you're going to get more protein than milk, right? If you eat a handful of seeds or a handful of nuts, you're going to get 6 to 7 times more protein than you did in that glass of milk. That's why all mammalian species that are bigger and stronger than humans do it, because it's in everything. And in fact, as lowly as like a lot of fruits and vegetables are, with about maybe 2-3 grams of protein per serving, if you ate your 13 servings of fruits and vegetables a day like you should, to ward off about, can reverse about 100% of everything, even 80% of cancers, right? Just from that lowly little fruits and vegetables. With 2 grams, you're already getting 26 grams of protein out of that. Most Americans only need about 28 to 31 grams of protein a day. So You know, beef gets you almost all that with one serving 3 ounces of beef, but your handful of nuts gets you almost the same thing. Quinoa gets you almost the same thing. I mean, 1 cup of quinoa is 28, right? You're going to get more protein out of quinoa than you'll ever get out of dairy. And that's why vegans can be super strong. But again, if you eat your grass-fed beef, you're fine. You eat your free-range eggs, you're fine, right? They're actually going to be beneficial to you. So what about the myth of vitamin D? And I love this one because it's a complete joke on the public. This idea that vitamin D, milk is a rich source of vitamin D. Where does it get its vitamin D? It's added to it. It's synthetically derived vitamin D, and it's fortified in the milk. So that's crazy. That's like putting a multivitamin in there and saying it's full of vitamins and minerals, right? And you know, Coke did that in Europe, that Coke Plus. Well, great. So Coke's a good source of vitamins and minerals now, right? No, it's not real, right? So where do we get our real vitamin D from? And that's, of course, the sun. In fact, depending on how light your skin is, a nice pale person is going to get over 10 to 20,000 IUs of vitamin D with 15 minutes of sunlight, right? Very, very little sunlight. And so you look at a glass of milk, right? Has 100 IUs for 8 ounces. That's ridiculous, right? I mean, you're talking about like going out in the sun for maybe a minute to get that much. And so cod liver oil has, 13 times more vitamin D naturally because it's a fat-soluble vitamin that's stored in the liver. So that's awesome. If you throw in a little salmon on the grill, you get 566. You get 5 times more than you would get through dairy. And of course, if you just go out in the sun and breathe oxygen and move around, you're going to get so much more benefit than just the vitamin D, right? And so with that, you got to be careful of certain medications like statins. Statins inhibit cholesterol, which is a ridiculous idea. We talk about that in Cholesterol Myth. But vitamin D is made of cholesterol. So if you lower cholesterol, you're going to lower vitamin D. Vitamin D prevents 100 different cancers in the body. So it also enhances your mood, and it protects your cardiovascular system. So you want lots of vitamin D, but it's provided naturally and free of charge, or you could just eat it in non-dairy foods. So what about the idea that, yeah, raw is better, right? Well, you can't get any more raw than these two guys, right? Drink that straight from the source. And look at the cow. The cow looks so disturbed. So, if you're disturbed by looking at that, look at that cow. I mean, he's just horrified. Or she is, I guess. So, that's so natural right there. And so a lot of people would be like, well, the ills of dairy. Well, it's offset by the fact that if you just drink raw dairy. Well, the problem is the same, right? You're not getting the nutrition that you really need, but what you're getting is a whole bunch of problems with that. And so one of the things to keep in mind is that lactose deficiency is not a disease. It's actually a normal thing, right? Because all mammalian species stop making lactose enzyme about the age of 2 for humans, but whenever they wean. So for like cows, it'd be 10 months. Or not 10 months. By 10 months, they're an adult. So, it depends on the weaning time for those animals. So they all have different ones, but once they're done, the body doesn't produce that enzyme anymore to break down lactose or milk sugar. And worldwide, I mean, it's 70 to 100% in most cultures. And in America, you can expect that those numbers are going to be fairly close too. And that's because we're just thousands of years designed to not make an enzyme for that because you don't use it. You can't even feed dairy to cows, or sorry, you can't feed dairy to baby humans before the year 1, right? You'll kill the baby. That's how messed up it is. We have to truly force this upon ourselves. And so a lot of Chinese cultures, Asian cultures, and even Jewish cultures, I mean, they have up to 100% loss of the ability to make lactase. So you end up with all these kind of gut problems, irritable bowel, Crohn's, but it goes other places too. And so gut problem is like a very easy thing to notice, but it's the other things that are kind of floating under the radar, right? And so dairy has 25 proteins that cause allergic reactions. Most people know, okay, dairy, lactose deficiency is a big one, but that's not the same as saying casein or whey protein allergies. But even out of those, there's still 23 more that can cause problems. And we're just not designed to drink dairy from another animal because we end up having these molecular mimics, which then cause these little autoimmune things. And so for a lot of people, it's going to be things like eczema, allergies, psoriasis, asthma, upset stomach, but it even triggers mental problems like depression and weepiness and the feeling of being overwhelmed. And one of the biggest things we see in practice is really anxiety, chronic anxiety from drinking dairy. In children, you might even see things like bedwetting, which is a very frustrating thing for patients and their parents. But chronic ear infections, which then lead to chronic antibiotic use, of course, when they're not supposed to be using that. And it's just interesting because you'll see lots of people have these chronic things, and it's the dairy. It's something that simple, right? In fact, like if you get rid of wheat and dairy, 75% of most people's problems just go away, you know? I mean, people spend a lot of time and a lot of money hearing me say the same thing that they already knew, that I told them for free. You got to get off the wheat and dairy. It's problematic. And that's the bulk of people's problems. It's not all their problems, but it's a bulk of people's problems. And it's a very easy fix, right? We are not designed to drink dairy. We are not designed to consume dairy products. So why is it so hard for people to stop? You know, that's one of those things. Like on my questionnaire, I ask people two questions. I say, do you like dairy or do you love dairy? And we do that with wheat too. Do you like bread or do you love bread? Right? And people will have some really visceral responses. They'll be like, I love bread. Oh my gosh, I love it. Right? And you know, some people are like, dairy's okay. You know? So why do some people have this love relationship with it? Even though, you know, dairy wasn't a very good boyfriend and dairy, you know, broke her vase and ran up her credit and then, hung out with wheat, right? Dairy wasn't very good to this person. They have all these problems. So why? Why are people still addicted to them? And so it comes down to this. Dairy is an actual drug. Dairy and wheat also contain a protein called morphine. So casomorphine for dairy, glutenomorphine for wheat. So it has a morphine effect. And what's worse is the morphine addiction to dairy is 20 times more addicting than morphine, the street drug. And I've tried this out. No, I'm just kidding. I didn't try it out. So take my word for it. Research tried it out. And I don't know what college students they got to do this, right? But that was probably a great $40 they earned. So they found out that, you know, that's more addicting. And that's why you see comfort in dairy, right? You see a movie and she breaks up with her boyfriend, and then what is she eating? A half gallon of ice cream, right? Because that dairy is going to soothe her needs. If you guys watch Seinfeld, you know, back in the day, you know, George's big fantasy was to sit in a Barca lounger and eat a block of cheese over the summer. Who thinks that, right? But that's soothing, that's comfort for that person, right? So, what's the truth then? Those are the myths. So what's the truth? Well, the truth is not very appealing. Oh, sorry. The truth is not very appealing. For men, it's big problems. Now, this is one thing that you got to understand. Men, all boys, start out as a girl first. Now, they don't like to know this, but all men once had a vagina. they once had breast tissue, they once had ovaries. And if they have a Y chromosome, then, and only then, does the Wolffian hormone start prevailing, and it changes those girl parts into boy parts. So the ovaries become testicles, the uterus becomes a prostate, the breast tissue doesn't change at all. So men can still lactate and grow breast, and that's called witch's milk. If you ever have that for a Trivial Pursuit, then you know, right? And so, it ends up being the penis grows out of the vagina, and the vaginal tunica becomes the scrotum. And so the problem that we see here is if we estrogenize that process, we can actually cause changes there. You can cause anal genital malformation there. You can cause hypophallus, which is small penises in the babies, right? You can cause all these amorphic genitalia problems. Now, dairy does this and plastic does this, but dairy is going to be a big part of it, right? And so for men, why do men have a prostate so large they can't pee by age 40, like 1 out of 2 men? Because the prostate's a uterus, which has estrogen receptors, which when you consume dairy, dairy is fat, estrogen is fat, your cell wall is fat, your nucleus is fat, and DNA is inside there. And there is nothing that stops that estrogen from going right into the cell and causing genetic changes. For a man, that's devastating, because that means, by 2010, or no, it was 1990, I believe, 1 out of every 2 men by age 50 had a prostate so large they couldn't pee or ejaculate. By 2010, that number went up to age 40. By age 40, 1 out of 2 men in the United States couldn't have ejaculation or had problems peeing. And it's weird because I totally see this when I go to the movie theaters as a guy. You'll go in and there's guys standing at the urinal. You'll do your thing. You'll wash your hands, hopefully. And as you're leaving, those guys are still just standing there, right? And it's just dairy. It's just dairy. So they end up with these prostate problems. And the drug that they use is Proscar. If they use a natural supplement, it's called saw palmetto. But they both are what's called 5-alpha reductase inhibitors, which block estrogen effects. So keep drinking dairy, just keep taking my drug, is what it amounts to. And you're still going to have a large prostate. Breast cancer becomes a big issue for guys. Now, 1 out of every 1,000 breast cancers is a dude, right? And the estrogen in men's breasts can grow an actual breast. And in fact, it's so bad that the #1 elective surgery for men in the United States is male breast reduction surgery. And I'll tell you what, we went to the pool this summer out in Salina. They have a big water park and stuff. It's kind of cool. And you could go like this to the boys, and you could say, that's a breast. That's a real full breast, right? But it's like a 12-year-old boy. And so he's just high on the dairy, right? And I was actually, there's a company sponsored by Google, funded by Google, and I went out, or Eric Schmidt of Google, and they were wanting to use our software. And so they flew me out to Venice Beach, where there's like every possible type of person you've ever seen or heard of exists in this place, right? And so I'm watching walking the boardwalk, and there's this really cool guy. He has tats on his neck. He has a nice long chain, swinging, his shirt's off. He just looked freaking cool, like right out of a rap video, right? And he had little poofy breasts, poofy little breasts, 10-year-old girl breasts. And this dude's gangster, straight up gangster, walking down the boardwalk, and yet he's got 10-year-old girl boobs, right? And so I wanted to tell him, dude, you can't be gangster if you're drinking milk, right? It's not working out for you, buddy. But I did, because, yeah, So that's the tough part, is that a lot of guys don't know this. And so they're getting breast cancer just the same. In fact, you're starting to see more and more men lactate. And so they're having leakage from their breast, which is kind of a concern for guys, right? You look at skin tags, you'll notice guys that have skin tags around their eyes, around their neck, under their arms. Those skin tags are from growth hormone. And dairy Cow dairy is full of growth hormone. There's two hormones that are going to be super high in dairy, and one is estrogen, which your amount is this, cow estrogen is this. And the other one is insulin-like growth factor 1. And what it does is it says, let's grow tissue really quickly, right? Because what we're trying to do with dairy is we're trying to take a 75-pound calf and make it into a 1,200-pound beast in the shortest period possible time, which is 10 months, right? 10 months. And the way you get that kind of growth is by a tremendous amount of hormones that say grow tissue. And so then, with the estrogenification of men, you end up with libido problems and, of course, moobs. And we said that Harvard, are more scared of Harvard men are more scared of dairy than plastic because it's so much more bioavailable. So we end up feminizing the male body with this. So what about women? It gets worse for them, right? Because they already have a little bit of higher estrogen than guys. And so it makes it even worse. So all that estrogen, that huge amount of estrogen, is telling women's tissue to grow. So they end up with fibrocystic breasts. They end up with endometriosis, is where it's saying grow that uterus so big that it starts growing the lining out into the fallopian tubes, out into the abdominal cavity, down the vagina, right? Uterine fibroids is the same thing. Heart disease, major problem for women, right? Even more than men now. And it's because of the surges of estrogen. Ovarian failure, of course, and, PCOS and fibroids and all those kind of things. It's all the same. All the surges of estrogen. And what's worse is you get the added bonus of autoimmune. 90% of all autoimmune disease is women. 90%. And that's because they take birth control, which is estrogen, hormone replacement, which is estrogen. They drink lots of milk, which is estrogen. They just have estrogen overdrive, and because of the chronic stress, they have progesterone deficiency, which means they're estrogen dominant, which then ends up in autoimmune and all these kind of hormonal problems. So breast cancer, uterine cancer, ovarian cancer, all that messed up stuff, right? I mean, today, 1 in 7 couples by age 33 are infertile. It's insane. So we come to the children. And this is a problem for children, big time. Because again, we're trying to grow giant cows out of little kids. And with early development, that's a big problem, right? So in 1975, the average age of menses for a girl was about 16, 17 years old, which today seems really old. But the average age today for girls is 8, 9 years of age. And what that means is when they go through puberty or they start their menstrual cycle at 8 or 9, that their body is now ready to have a baby. And that's not healthy. That's not accurate. And the earlier you start development for puberty, the earlier you start menopause. So they're going to have a shorter fertility cycle with that. And of course, you're going to end up with all kinds of hormonal problems with that. You're going to end up with heavy periods, missed periods, irregular periods, very, very, very painful periods. And we're even seeing secondary sexual characteristics in children as young as 3 years of age now because of all the estrogen in the dairy. And of course, we talked about the feminization of the boys. The estrogen makes fat, the fat makes more estrogen, and it becomes a vicious cycle. And so we end up feminizing boys. And then future problems, we can actually cause epigenetic changes. And that is going to change what their children are going to look like and behave in the hormonal function based on the things that we consume and we do to our bodies. So that's a horrible nightmare that we not only inflict on ourselves, but we inflict on our spouses and we inflict on our children. And it doesn't have to be that way. So what do you do instead? Well, luckily, when I started doing this 13 years ago, it was not as easy. But today there's lots of alternatives to milk. And all they do is they grind up nuts with water and they drain it, and that becomes your nut milk, right? I mean, you can make these at home. So if you eat almond milk, drink almond milk or brown rice milk or soy milk, organic soy milk, or hemp milk or flax milk or any of those kind of hazelnut milk's really good. There's lots of alternatives to it, right? The only one you probably don't want to do is like sweetened ones, and you don't want to do white rice ones. That's not going to be beneficial. It's only sugar at that point. But these things are full of protein, omega-3s, really healthy things, right? If you make it yourself, you can take the nuts that are left over, that you ground up, and you can actually make it into a really interesting kind of cream cheese mixture, which is nice. Now, alternative to dairy with cheeses, that's a harder part. They have like transvestite cheeses, that are kind of like, is it cheese? It's not cheese. It looks like cheese. Kind of tastes like cheese, but they're really not very good. I mean, you got to really work hard to make it taste normal or look normal. Some people do a good job at that, but it's a very hard thing in the beginning to just go buy fake cheese and make it work, right? There's an art to that. And it's just processed crap that's made to look and taste like cheese, which you're not supposed to be in the first place, right? So creamers, there's coconut creamer, there's almond creamer, there's Mimi cream. Those things are pretty awesome. So if you do drink a little coffee once in a while, right, you can use that instead of your artificial creamer or your dairy. And ice cream, of course there's alternatives to that. So like there's coconut ice cream, which is the bomb. There's organic soy ice cream, which is okay. So there's wonderful options these days. A lot of times you can take Mimi cream, frozen fruit, and make your own ice cream like that. And butter, the alternative to butter is just basically a healthy oil with a dash of salt. That's what equals butter in recipes. So if it says like 3 tablespoons of butter, just do 3 tablespoons of olive oil, a little pinch of salt, you're all good. Very, very easy transition with that. Well, that kind of sums us up. And I hope this made a big impact for you. This is a very, very common topic, and I'm glad that we're posting this and getting it out there, because it's a very hard thing to negotiate with your family in the beginning. And even my own, it took quite a lot of convincing. And I have 4 daughters, but it was that important that we kept pushing to really get our family to make those changes, right? And now we don't know any better, so it all works out. So I want to thank you guys for listening to this, and if you have any questions or comments, or let me know. There's several more that we're going to be posting for the cleaning challenge, and I hope this really impacts you. And thank you for attending.